Hey guys, hello and welcome back to my channel. This is Kshitij, and on this channel we talk about robotics, research and academia. In today's video, we'll be talking about the typical jargon that we use in research day-to-day life. These are some of the terms I wish I knew when I first started because I had to learn them on the fly as I went along with my research journey. So to make your life easy as an early stage researcher, I'll try to explain a few of these terms already, and if there are some more that you think are missing in this video, feel free to comment down below and let me know that you would like to know more about them as well. So first up is conference proceedings. So there are different kind of publications in academia, and in this video we're going to be briefly touching over three of them. One is a conference, the journal, and a book. So the first one is a conference proceeding. Now, when you submit a manuscript, it gets reviewed and then accepted, let's say, for publication. Then the way the conference works is that you visit a particular venue, assuming pandemics like COVID don't exist, and all the accepted presenters, they go there, they're given a particular presentation slot, and then they present their research idea in the form of a presentation to an audience. Oftentimes there's also a Q&A, and in case if the time is short, then people meet up after over coffee breaks or dinner or lunch breaks. And that's a good way to forge connections and find collaborations and discuss your idea further and explore the feedback from the community. So remember, conference manuscript, as you can see one on my screen, this is my own paper. These are early stage research ideas where you have developed a certain concept and you found initial proof of concept and you just want to put it out there to get some feedback from the community. So this is a very good way of doing something like that, right? Couple of aspects of a conference paper that you should know. So when it gets accepted and published, you'll typically have this kind of information on the top which says which year, which venue was the conference published in. The manuscript. Now, why is it called a proceeding is because, back in the days, we used to be given a thick booklet of proceedings, which used to be a collection of all accepted manuscripts. And sometimes it used to be a summary of 1,000, 2,000 something papers, depending on the acceptance rate, right? By the way, the acceptance rate is the proportion of the net accepted papers over the total number of papers submitted, right? So that's another term we use in academia. So we used to be given this thick booklet, but then over the recent years, we started getting some sort of pen drives or USB sticks. So those used to have the digital PDFs. The reason for doing something like this is that, the publisher, for example, in this case, the publisher was IEEE. They take a couple of months post the conference to typeset everything and to print it and put it on their publisher's website. So in my case, it would be the IEEE website. And you don't want people waiting for your manuscript for that long, especially the authors who have actually been accepted and contributed. So they sort of get like, an early bird pass. So those proceedings are actually the finalized PDFs that are yet to go out on the publisher's website. So for example, this could be an early stage PDF that I have, which will have all the copyright information in the footer. Typically, it has a copyright information down here. It has a page number that would appear in the final digital, think of it like a digital book. So it would have a page number where your manuscript appears. And these page numbers are very important because when you take up the bibliographic information, it has these kind of things, right? So there's a page number from and to, there's a venue, there's a title, there's the authors. Now, on the topic of authors, there's a couple of things that you should know as well. So typically at the venues where I have published, the authors have been arranged in the order of contribution, right? So in this case, I was the first author. It means I was doing most of the work and this idea had a lot to do with me. The others were in supportive role. So basically the others are called co-authors. Also, there is this concept of a corresponding author, right? So in case of a conference paper, a corresponding author is someone who's going to be willing to address Q&As that come in as and when they come in. So for instance, you found my paper, you found something intriguing, but something was unclear, or maybe you want to collaborate, right? So how do you reach out to me? So, or am I the right person to reach out to? You figure that out by looking at the corresponding author. Now, in some research groups, typically that would be the professor, because students are there for the tenure of their degree. Once they graduate, they move on, they go to another place. It's hard to find them, so on and so forth. But in my case, most of the times I have been the corresponding author, and whenever my email address or contact information has updated, I've changed it on my website so people can still find me. So there is this concept of corresponding author, then the rest are co-authors. Typically, in some venues, I have also learned that these authors are arranged in the alphabetical order, but in our case, that wasn't the case. So be wary of the fact, right? Don't just presume that the first person has to be the corresponding author. Sometimes when it's not clear, or if there are more than one students who have done equal contribution, they typically put a star mark on the top and they say equal contribution. And sometimes they even write explicitly for correspondences, contact so-and-so person. So that would be your point of contact in case if you want to talk further about anything, right? So that was that about conferences. Now next talk about journals, right? So these were conference proceedings. Now for a journal, we call the published version as a journal article. And the difference between a conference and a journal, aside from the fact that in a conference you're presenting, in a journal, it's a bit more generous in terms of the pages that you have. So as you can see, my journal, I have about 15 pages, and sometimes you can even write up to 20 pages, depending on if they have any hard limit or not. But for a conference proceeding, for example, we typically have 6+2, which basically means 6 pages for the main content and up to 2 pages for references, right? So as you can see, I have twice the amount of space in a journal, and that's the whole point of writing a journal manuscript, is to give people rigorous analysis of what has been done, explain everything in detail. So think of conference as a trailer and journal as the actual movie that people have been waiting for, right? In a journal, the publication cycle is typically quite long. It could take anywhere between 1 to 2 years, 1.5 years to get published. Also, it undergoes a bit more rigorous review as opposed to a conference. And in a journal, you're not giving any presentations, right? So this manuscript got accepted, and that was only the reviewers who reviewed this manuscript, and then it was deemed worthy of publication, and then it got through. Now it's up to me to kind of help people find this manuscript and for it to gain visibility, but that's a different story. So typically when you have a journal manuscript published, you're not giving any presentations, right? Now we've been talking about these people called reviewers. Who are these reviewers, right? So in the research community, reviewers, there is this concept of peer review, which means if you're an expert writing a manuscript, there are other people like you who are also subject matter experts who are going to give you an independent analysis of your manuscript. So you say that you've done a lot of good work and it deserves to be considered state of the art, but is it really so? So you need an unbiased opinion. So these people are called reviewers. Reviewers typically do not get paid for doing review, right? It's a voluntary service, and they do it because somebody else did the same thing for their paper when they submitted it for review. So it's like kind of giving back to the community, and that's why it's called peer review, right? So when something is peer reviewed, it means it has undergone this review process, and the reviewers have accepted it to be worthy of publication, and then it goes through. For things like workshops, this may or may not be the case, because workshops are even more preliminary understanding of the concept and initial discussions and things like that. So typically there is more weightage for conference, even more for the journal publications as opposed to a workshop, because it may or may not be peer reviewed, right? So that's another concept that you need to understand of peer review. Now let's look at what a journal manuscript looks like. So like in the conference proceedings, we had the copyright notice of the publisher and the venue, right? Because it was a physical venue. In a journal, it's a digital publication, so there is no physical venue, but you would have the name of the journal in which you publish. So for example, in my case, it was Mechatronics. This number 57 is typically the volume. So it's like a magazine, right? So it's going to have volume numbers, it's going to have issue numbers. So that's how it gets identified. Then there is the year, and then there are the page numbers in the actual volume when it gets published. So it would imagine like it's again a digital book. So they assimilate all the publications that got accepted for that issue. And then for that issue, they get page numbers, like the official page numbers. And this information would be a part of the bibliographic information as well. Again, for my publications in the journal too, the concept was the same. I put a star mark here to denote a corresponding author. The author sequence again denotes the order of contribution. So mine was the maximum, so I became the first author. Then there are author affiliations, and the rest of the manuscript looks pretty much the same, right? So that's about journal publication. Now, the third kind of publication I will talk about is a book, right? There are two ways of contributing to a book. Either you could contribute to a book chapter, which basically means somebody else is doing like a full book, and you are a subject matter expert in a couple of chapters in that book. So they ask you to collaborate and contribute those few chapters, and then they take care of editing and compiling it with the rest of the book, right? In my case, I went down the other path, which is to completely publish your own book, right? So my book is available on Amazon here. I'll be making a full detailed video on how I published this technical book and what went through behind the scenes, how long it took, and the typical questions that I always get about the book writing. So this is a third kind of publication that you could expect. And this is in increasing order of complexity and the amount of efforts. There is a workshop, conference, journal, and then there's a book, right? So like I said, there are two kinds of ways you could contribute. So when you write a chapter, it's considered under a contributed chapter, right? So imagine if you're making a list of publications that you have, you'd be putting that under contributed chapters if you've only written chapters for other people. If you've written a full book like me, so in my case, I write it under books, because that's understood that you were the sole author, or let's say co-author of a full book. So you had a lot to do in a lot of different places, right? So then you don't have to specify whether you worked on one chapter, one paragraph, one picture, whatever. It's in my case, so I wrote the book with my previous supervisor. So I just write it as books, right? So these were the three kind of publications that you should know about. And in the previous video, we talked about this thing called archive, which allows early access to publications, right? So we talked about this, this journal paper of mine in mechatronics that got published. So the way I went about it was, the initial idea is here. So operational range estimation. So I did this concept, I did the initial proof of concept, and I published this as a conference, right? Then again, for the operational range estimation idea, again, you see that keyword is still here. I went for a more detailed analysis, I generalized it and extended it, and I went for a journal. So mechatronics is a journal. Further, they are talked more at length in my book as well, but let's leave that aside. In the middle, I had this option to kind of, while the editors and the publisher's office was typesetting my manuscript for the journal, as I said, it takes a lot of time. So what I did was I uploaded that on archive. So that's another one of my journals, not the exact same one, but this journal has been recently accepted, and it's been waiting for typesetting and formal kind of arrangement of the text, right? But in the meantime, I can still put this idea out there for people to start using and reading and get awareness already, right? So for this, I put this idea on archive. We've already talked about archive in the previous video. The link is in the I button above if you've missed it, and if you don't know what archive is. But the concept is the same, right? So here, like I said, so there were multiple corresponding authors. So we put a star mark at the end of our names, and then we put the contact information in the bottom. The rest of the things looks more or less the same. Typically, when you're in the process of writing the journal, right, so you're still going back and forth with the reviewers, you're justifying, you write the manuscript in like a single column format. It's easier to read, right? So although this manuscript has 43 something pages at the moment, but remember, that's because I've written it as a single column format. In the final typeset version, it would become 2-column format, like it was in my case here. Then it will reduce to something like 15, 20, or whatever pages, depending on the formatting style they use. Right. Another important aspect of a corresponding author that you should remember, right? So it's not only corresponding to the audience and their queries if and when they arise, right? Corresponding author also corresponds with the reviewers at the review stage. What this basically means is, so for instance, if you submitted a conference paper, although it's very rare, but there is this stage called rebuttal stage, right? So the reviewers have done their review, they have given you certain feedback. Now it's your chance to defend your idea, which is called the rebuttal phase. In a journal, it's the very common way to do it. So you submit it for review and then you get a review feedback. Then you revise your manuscript accordingly, and then you write a rebuttal to accompany with it to say how the changes were incorporated based on the review comments and so on and so forth. And then you submit the revised manuscript and the rebuttal, right? And then this process continues until the reviewers are satisfied that all of their queries have been addressed. In a conference, however, like I said, the publication cycle is very short, right? So for a journal, if you're talking about 1 to 1.5 years, a conference, you're talking about, let's say, 4 months, 6 months, something like that. So it's like quite short. So there is no time to keep going back and forth, right? So very few conferences in my domain in robotics have this rebuttal stage. But again, it's the job of the corresponding author to do most of the heavy lifting for the rebuttal, like preparing the template, collecting all the questions from the reviewers, preparing the initial answers, and then of course you can run it by your co-authors and have them on the same page and help them take their help in polishing the rebuttal response that you've written. So that's another important concept of rebuttal that you're gonna hear about if and when you start doing the publications, right? So we've gone over corresponding authors, co-authors. Now, last but not the least is the concept of open access, or OA for short, right? Oftentimes when you are writing manuscripts, let's see if one of my manuscripts have funding acknowledgement here. No, it doesn't. So anyways, if your manuscript has a funding acknowledgement, right? So say you were paid from certain project or by certain agency or whatever, and you say, okay, this project was funded by blah, blah, blah agency under the grant agreement number, so and so, right? Sometimes the funding agencies now have a mandate to allow open access. Now, what this means is, for instance, this manuscript conference proceeding was published by IEEE, which means it's a subscription-based service. And unless I am a subscriber of IEEE, I have an account, I have a membership, I cannot access this, right? Oftentimes, most universities subscribe to these kind of big organizations like IEEE, ACM, and so on and so forth. But just as an example, this is a subscription-only access. Same thing for this manuscript on Elsevier mechatronics. If this is not subscribed by my university, I would not have access to. I might, because I am the author, so that's a special case. But if I'm looking for somebody else's manuscript, then it would be a problem, right? So it's behind a paywall. So that restricts the amount of audience that has access to the research, right? But the funding agencies want to reach more and more people to have a larger impact. So these days, there is an ongoing push for having open access articles. Now, what this means is, if there is a mandate in your grant provider that you need to allow open access, you would have to opt for the open access route of publication. And this is more common for journals now, right? So what this means is, there are different further branches like green route and golden route, but this allows unrestricted access to people to read the manuscript. So if I, as an author, want to give you access to a published manuscript, you would have to go through me and take my permission to get the published version of the manuscript. If you, however, want to directly get it, you have one of two ways: either to go with the preprint version, which is, for example, on archive. It's the same content, just formatted a bit differently. But for whatever reason, if you want the actual formatted manuscript, you could look up an open access version, right? So then you will have an unrestricted access to the published version. Now, like I said, there is a green standard, gold standard, different formats of open access. It depends on which stage in the publication cycle are you allowed by the publisher to put your manuscript out there for the people, right? Sometimes, for example, there is an embargo, and after that embargo is lifted, you only get the author's version of the manuscript out for people to read. So, for example, things like that are put up on archive as a preprint, which will not have this kind of information like the publisher's information, their logo, copyright information, or even this kind of typesetting as well. So it would be like a plain manuscript like this, single column, all the basic content out there. Sometimes, however, if you choose the more premium kind of open access route, then you would have easy access to, this full published manuscript will be out there for people to use. So these are the different kind of jargons that we use. But remember, all of this is available online, right? And how do you identify that this is a legit publication or not? Like, does it get a name identifier, or what happens, right? So there is this notion of digital identifiers, and there are a few different kinds of them, right? So, for example, let's talk about the book that I was talking about. So here you can see there is an ISBN number, right? ISBN number is an international standard book number, which is about a 10 or a 13 digit number used to identify like physical copies of the books, right? So here you can see ISBN 10 is my 10-digit number, 13 is my 13-digit identifier, and this because it's also available as a physical textbook for people to purchase off of Amazon, off of publisher's website. So it needs an ISBN number, right? There is also an ISSN number, which is an international standard serial number, which is typically for the digital prints, right? So it's an 8-digit identifier for the digital prints. What this basically means is for conference proceedings, for journal articles, for workshop proceedings, for magazine articles. So they would have something called an ISSN, right? Another kind of identifier, which is of more recent days, is a DOI. DOI is called the Digital Object Identifier. And this identifier applies to all digital print. So it's a unique alphanumeric string. And for instance, here you could see, let's see, DOI. There you go, here. If you click on this, you see doi.org/10.something/blah, blah, blah. Now, this is a permanent digital identifier for my publication. Right, so no matter if there are other places where I put up the manuscript and those links break down or get taken down or whatever happens to them, this is one link that is always supposed to stay for eternity as long as the internet exists, right? So these are the kind of identifiers that you might hear about as well. DOI, ISBN, ISSN are the most common ones. So these are some of the jargons that we keep using in our daily lives. I hope these terms are a bit clearer to you now. And if there are, like I said, if there are other terms that you think you hear but you don't know what they mean and you want me to help you out with them, comment down below in the comment section, and let me know what kind of terms are you looking for clarification. Be sure to share and like this video with fellow early stage researchers and subscribe to my channel so that you're notified as soon as the other videos on my channel go live. Thank you so much for watching and hope you have a nice day.